Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. On the eve of BC's 2024 provincial election, we ask, was it the worst election ever? Here to continue the conversation is my colleague at the Tyee, which did a lot of great in-depth coverage of the provincial election, including my column series, CHEK, which basically demonstrated how all the parties made no sense. Our guest tonight covered a range of topics, including fact checks and policy analysis. I've admired her work for years now. Returning to the show, she is Jen St. Denis, and this conversation is supported by Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey, distinctly Vancouver Island, uniquely Shelter Point. So Jen, brass tacks, was this the worst election ever?
Yeah, it was.
End of segment.
Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind.
What made it so bad?
I've never covered an election, a provincial election, where, I'm sitting at home, 9 o'clock at night, trying to recharge my batteries. I check Twitter quickly, and I see a comment from candidate Bruce Chapman that is so awful, so racist, so Islamophobic, that I'm actually in tears reading it. I've never
Imagine how I felt.
Right? And that wasn't the only thing that happened. It was just relentless. Like, the negativity of this election and the polarization that some of these comments has caused it's been hard to take, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely seemed to be an inordinate amount of racism, and
too
much. Even around the fear mongering around BC Land Act amendments directed towards Indigenous people and First Nations people. Why did this election take on these really dark tones?
Well, we're obviously always try to cover elections in as non-biased a way as possible. And, the NDP certainly have a lot to answer for in terms of things that maybe they haven't done. But I think the blame really does lie with the BC Conservatives and the way they have chosen to campaign. Even John Rustad choosing to make the very first question in the House when he took on the leadership of the BC Conservatives, talking about how SOGI needs to go, and giving David Eby that entry to go up and defend trans kids and talk about how this is a very small minority of kids who are at risk of suicide. That was the start of his leadership of the BC Conservative Party. And we have just seen as the election has heated up and people have been digging into these candidates' past comments on social media, and they have made a lot of comments on social media and not bothered to delete them. We have seen residential school denialism. We've seen that from the candidate Sheldon Clare and Prince George. We've just seen, over and over again, SOGI being brought up to trans rights. We've seen John Rustad go up and be in a debate and not say the truth about, an overdose that he saw or he thinks he saw, where he said the person died and they actually didn't.
Right. Yeah.
It's just been seemingly relentless.
It feels like it has, and it almost feels like a lost opportunity to hold the BC NDP to account for their record.
Yes.
I mean, across the board, British Columbians are not really thrilled with their job performance on basically all the files. And instead of talking about this, we're talking about these internet trolls and things that they've said that are quite hurtful and offensive.
This should have been an easy election for a center-right party to win, or at least get a really good result on, in terms of a stronger position going forward.
A center-right party not led by Kevin Falcon, of course.
Well, yeah, we can, yeah. But what we had, so there's tons of stuff that a center-right party or a right-wing party could have gone after the NDP on. The ballooning budget, of course, we know right or right-leaning voters are always worried about that. The state of healthcare is terrible. We still haven't caught up to the COVID-19 disruption of society in all sorts of areas. The opioid crisis is terrible. Homelessness is up. There's all these issues like inflation, food inflation. There's all these sort of bread and butter issues that voters care about a lot that we could have been focusing on this election. But this was just such a complete distraction, these numerous comments, I didn't even talk about the misogyny, but it's there too. So
the BC NDP basically ran a campaign on mudslinging,
and
right?
Don't vote for these terrible people.
Exactly.
That was what they've been focusing on. And doling out a few goodies, matching, the Rustad rebate, they sort of had to match it. And that sort of thing. Promising renters that they can have pets. Well, why didn't they do that 4 years ago? So yes, they've
But then also caving on the carbon tax and harm reduction.
They have been pushed right by the BC Conservatives. So in that sense, I guess the BC Conservatives have been quite successful. Let's give the BC Conservatives some credit here too. This is a newly recharged party. Mm-hmm. They've been a non-entity for decades in BC, and here they are. They're poised to become either the government or the official opposition. So, okay, they're doing something right, but it's just the negativity and the comments that are just blatantly racist from some of the candidates, not to mention the odd comments from Rustad on some issues like vaccines.
So-called vaccines, Nuremberg 2.0, eating the bugs.
Yeah.
There was a lot.
And it goes, it's not just the candidates, right? It goes into the board of the BC Conservative Party.
Yeah.
On this board, there's this young woman called Lindsay Shepherd, who was this sort of free speech crusader when she was in university. She invited white supremacist Faith Goldie to her campus. She also went on a podcast by a really well-known, Quebec-based white supremacist. And she has continued to say things like immigration should be cut by 95%. White people are being discriminated in the labor market, like as long ago as a few months ago. So it seems to be, it's not everyone in the party.
Is that the lady that tweeted me?
Yes.
And you brought
you.
that to my attention.
Yes.
It also feels like there was a lot of media dodging and even debate dodging. I was actually supposed to moderate a leaders debate. UBC was putting it on. John Rustad pulls out, then of course Eby pulls out, and then it's not happening. Did you find that experience as well as a reporter?
It was so frustrating. And it was even down to not wanting to answer questions from the mayors and councillors of BC at the Union of BC Municipalities Convention. So they had this format where David Eby and then the other two leaders of the parties were supposed to go and they give a speech, and then there was a Q&A portion. David Eby did the Q&A portion. John Rustad did not want to do that. He just wanted to talk at them. Yeah, and it's been, it's not across the board that you can't talk to them. I have had success going up to John Rustad and talking to him. He was open with me to answer questions. Mm-hmm. And I've actually always found that with him when I approach him. But then we have seen them getting more and more locked down. I think the biggest example of that was when they cut off Les Lane, who's been a columnist for the Victoria Times Colonist since 1995 and mentored many of the political reporters in this province. And the press gallery was kind of as a unit were like outraged at that. You just don't cut off Les because they had told him he had to stick to the topic at hand, which was like their mental health plan. He didn't want to do that, and they just cut him off. And that kind of encapsulates, as the campaign has gone on, how they've kind of reacted to the media.
So really quickly, 30 seconds or less, it sounds like you're just blaming the BC Conservatives for making this the worst election ever.
I sound like David Eby. No, I mean, let's put a little blame on David Eby too.
Yes,
because
please.
He has also been really negative, right? He has really fear-mongered on John Rustad as well, to the point that I'm a bit tired of that as well. So let's not put all the blame on the BC Conservatives.
Fair enough. Jen, always a pleasure to chat with you. Keep up the great work. And it was so great to be colleagues at the Tyee over the course of this election.
It was fun. Great column.
Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thanks.
Folks, one of the best reporters in Vancouver. She is Jen St. Denis. Big thank you to Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey for supporting local conversations and being my drink of choice after episodes like this one. Now, after some business, did we really deserve this? All this? I'm going to take a moment up next.